Sports Illustrated dropped this the other day, going through the Steelers' best case scenario and case scenario in 2024, what it means for the future, so on and so forth. Their best case and worst case scenario is pretty easy to guess. It's what we've said a bunch of times, but I want to see if we have a different spin on what they say. Their best case scenario here is Russell Wilson revives his playing career with the Pittsburgh Steelers, leading them to the playoffs, becoming that QB1, and finding his stride once again at 35 years old in Pittsburgh. And then the worst case scenario is Russell Wilson and Justin Fields struggle with the Steelers' difficult schedule. They're unable to climb up the ladder and get any better than last year, and they find themselves in the same situation that they were in this offseason. I have a bit of a twist on both those, because those are the easy answers. Yeah, whatever. Mm-hmm. Your quarterback doesn't work out. Great. What about this one? What about the Pittsburgh Steelers don't make a wide receiver trade? This is worst case scenario. Steelers don't make a wide receiver trade. They rely heavily on the running game, and Najee Harris and Jaylen Warren, who are not zone running backs, do not fit in Arthur Smith's offense, which is a zone running offense. And the Steelers have found themselves in purgatory with no offensive weapons whatsoever and an absolutely useless game plan for seemingly the second year in a row. I think that is a worst case scenario that I don't want to say is likely for the Pittsburgh Steelers, but could lead to, I mean, look at Russell Wilson stinks and Justin Fields is mediocre. Okay, well, you made the playoffs last year with much worse than that. So you look at it this year, as long as you have a better offensive coordinator and some weapons, you can make something happen. If your running game doesn't work, I think the Pittsburgh Steelers are in massive trouble. That's my worst case scenario. Best case scenario, I'll give it to you in a second. I want to hear your thoughts on the worst.
Worst case scenario, I can see the path there if things just don't work with the personnel and with the new scheme. But at the same time, I think Arthur Smith's smart enough to know that if it's not working, you do have to make some tweaks, some adjustments. And I think this team has had plenty of time knowing that, listen, even if they add one wide receiver, they're not going to be, it's not going to change unless it's Brandon Ayuk. They're not going to change materially what this team is as far as talent on paper. So I think they're going to have a good idea of what they need to do, even if they don't get in that second receiver. So I don't know if it's likely, but I can see how you could potentially get to that.
Yeah, you could find yourself in a situation where, I mean, maybe Arthur Smith at the same time, because I agree with you, good offensive coordinators adjust to their offense, but I mean, maybe you find yourself in a situation where Arthur Smith doesn't have multiple offenses. He doesn't know how to do this in multiple different ways because he's only done this one. Like, if you look throughout his career, he's been a lot of the same stuff throughout, and it's worked very well. So how is that going to change, and so on and so forth? Look, I'm just putting a twist. Everybody can talk about, what if Russell Wilson doesn't work out? It's like, yeah, that's an easy one, pal. We all know that that's that bad things happen if that's what goes down. I'm going to go with that little twist on it. Best case scenario, I mean, the quarterbacks, again, are the easiest one. I think you could put two of them out here for this one. Best case scenario for the Pittsburgh Steelers is they have the best defense in football, and it carries them as far as they could possibly go with an offense that is better than last year's, because their defense last year was good enough to carry them a long way. If they have the best defense in football, or one of the best defenses in football, and let's not act like on paper they don't have an opportunity to be top 5, then how good can this team be? And then at the same time, best case scenario, George Pickens turns into a top 5 wide receiver, and the Pittsburgh Steelers have an absolute weapon on offense in the receiving game, and they don't got to worry about Brandon Ayuk or Ayuk or anybody else. They could just rely on George Pickens, who's a monster. Those are my best case scenarios for the Pittsburgh Steelers.
Yeah, mine goes along the similar lines of that with best case scenario. You hit the nail on the head when you said George Pickens. I mean, if he goes off and becomes a true number one, that unlocks so much for the rest of this offense. And I understand the rest of the wide receiver room doesn't look great, but if you have somebody operating at that high level, and then you have a guy like Arthur Smith potentially being able to push the right buttons with the rest of these guys and get these role players to step up just a little bit from where they've been in their career, you're sitting in a much better position than you were offensively last year. And let's not forget, last year they were a 10-win team that made the playoffs and were in that game into the fourth quarter against the Buffalo Bills.
Exactly. You could do much worse than you did last season, and somehow I just don't see, even with the tough schedule, the Pittsburgh Steelers getting there, because their team has improved that much. And if George Pickens, because we're very negative on the outlook of the wide receivers right now, we're incredibly negative, as we should be. It's a scary looking place right now. George Pickens has every opportunity to completely change our view there and change how we see these things and change the Pittsburgh Steelers season as a whole single-handedly, which is, I mean, and then boom, you go make that. We talked yesterday. Do you pay him? Yeah. If he does that, you pay him a lot, ton of money, too much money. But the Pittsburgh Steelers, they go and get it done. That's my best and worst case scenario. Did you have other ones?
I had one worst case scenario, and this one to me is something that I'm cautiously optimistic about, but I can still see it going in the wrong way. And it's the offensive line. You got a lot of young guys on the offensive line. And even if they all work out, it's going to take a while to mesh. New offensive lines. I talked to Duke Manyweather a couple of years ago when we were talking about the Cincinnati Bengals offensive line when they made a lot of switches. And he said, listen, even if it's a great offensive line, it's going to take 4, 5, 6 weeks for them to actually get on the same page and work together as a unit as best as they can. So even if everything works out with these young guys and the Steelers offensive line meshes, the problem with that is if while they're meshing, it costs them a game or two early in the season, the games in the back half are going to be hard to make up any bad losses in the front half. So that's my worst case scenario. Is it takes a little bit too long for the offensive line to mesh together. And by that point, they've cost themselves certain games that they needed to get going into that strong second half of the season.
Yeah, that's I agree. And that's, we've talked many times about, you have to find that offensive line, make that offensive line work right now, because you find yourselves in situations like that. The offensive line's a scary one, dude. And it's scary because it's like, it's anything you've built up. You've got it to a point, and then it's just like, all right, walk the line, man. Don't give up the line. Let's keep it going. And then you never know. You never know what's going to happen.
There for it to be the best offensive line for the Steelers in a long time. But again,
long time.
It's young guys and they got to mesh.
Yep. I agree 100%.